one of the main challenges we had was to free our data out of the software systems that the vendors that we had from the vendors. And that was a sort of frustrating start because the software vendors thought the data was theirs, and we claimed it was ours. And at the end of my career, it didn't sort of it wasn't just because of that reason, but at the end of my career, we had actually turned around and we had free access to the data in an open source data model. Right, so what's being discussed here today is absolutely achievable. What was the main game changer for oil and gas was that the oil companies are fairly large, and on the Norwegian continental shelf they operate 700 or 800 joint ventures together, so they're used to collaborating. So I was hoping to see the same when I entered shipping 5 years ago. Ship owners seem to be less collaborative than the oil and gas companies, so that's just an observation from today. Okay, so we've had a rich morning so far. We've heard a lot about the opportunities and the hype of AI. And I think we can state that AI is here to stay. So that's not what we're going to discuss today. It's more so what. And Malcolm Gladwell, he's one of my favorite authors. He writes books like Blink and Outliers and sort of quite interesting stuff. He also has a podcast. And the first podcast I heard about music, and the first podcast I heard with him was, he talked about the difference between rock and roll and country music. And he said, why do people cry when listening to country music, but never when they listen to rock and roll? And he said, well, rock and roll is all about fairy tales, or the boys are back in town. It's very unsentimental, and country is both sentimental, but it's also very specific. It's about your mother, your dog, and the people you grew up with. So it's easier to relate. So that is my challenge to today's panel. We're at the country level, right? We will be specific, and they will not get away with the generic stuff that they had on the posters. So with that said, let's start off. I have an opening question to all of you. What realistic impact of AI do you see within the next 12 to 24 months? One tangible idea that you see will come to fruition. And let's start with Christopher first.
Yes. So the human intent understanding is what I think is one of the strongest suits of AI. And within our industry, since we are communicating so much over email with PDFs, etc., I think that we're going to see much more available learning from the past than what we used to do. So we have high frequency data, yes, but we also have a large swath of knowledge that is stored in our inboxes. And to be honest, Outlook is not very good for their search functionality. So I would assume that most of you will, on a lower, easy level, be able to extract knowledge from your history.
Good, thank you. Yeah. Let's hand it over to Dimitris.
I agree with that. I think that the AI has the capability to understand what we want and what we're saying, and formulate it in a common sense way, which I mentioned in my presentation. You may have had enough of that, but that means that that you can communicate with your data and your systems in the way that you can communicate with your colleagues. I think that will be one of the pillars of development in the next year of AI.
Thank you. Christian?
I think it's going to be, it's very much a people business. I think what we'll see in the next 12 months is that we'll see an efficiency gain in a lot of the shipping companies across various things, and that both goes for whether you're doing claims support, or whether you demerge, or whether you're doing chartering, etc. Just the simple fact that you're actually beginning to use Copilot. We've seen finance teams using Claude, etc., building reports much faster. I'm not saying you could fire people, but I'm saying that the jobs that are that is out there will be redesigned in some shape and form. I know we might go into the longer horizon, but at Danelec we're right now working together with Maersk and Dan Pilot on making remote piloting where we're doing test cases in Danish waters. So the pilot no longer needs to go on board the vessel when it needs to enter into harbor. That would completely change that job. It's probably not going to be in 12 months, but it's if we can agree on how it's done, then it could change the job in 2 or 3 years down the line.
Thank you. That's specific and nice. And same with you, Christian. What in the next 4 to 5 years, what do you see could structurally change within our industry?
Yeah, that's a very good question. A very, very good question. I just spoke about the collapse of the software as a service industry, and I think part of that is actually that we are, all of us, becoming much better at being employees. We are more efficient around that. I think the example around the piloting thing is something where we're changing the jobs. I've been long enough in the maritime industry not to be naive around sharing data, but I'm ambitious and optimistic enough that I hope that we in 5 years' time will be better at defining protocols, or at least what we think we can make data lakes from onboard vessels to the shore team, and in that way be better at communicating on that. That requires some AI tool. I don't know, Tor, if that's concrete enough for you, but yeah.
That was the time allotted to that answer for you, so
yeah.
It was good enough now. Christopher?
Yes, so I totally agree, and I think that if we manage to open up our data, I think that will be the major change that we want to see, and that I think will open new doors, and I think that is where I want to see us go as well.
And what would the impact be?
The impact, I think, is more efficiency. I think we will see, even on the vessel design, for example, I think there is a lot of aspects to this where this can be applied as long as we start opening up more about how things work, how our data is actually representing the reality. So I would say that the most impactful will probably be that it will be easier to do less to achieve more.
Let me just follow up on that a little bit, because one discussion that we have in my company is how do we harvest the benefits that the employees experience from using generative AI? Right? How does the company benefit, not the individual employee going home and feeling a little less stressed? Have you had any kind of those kind of discussions in your company?
Are you asking me?
Yes, definitely. So there is this, I would say, piloting phase where you do individual people do their own thing to try to figure out whether it works, and then this industrialized version. So we do both, and on the industrialized version, we see that we've done some tests, and we see that now we're deploying globally a solution that actually answers 70% correct on questions that our customers come with. And we have customers all over the world, like 20 to 30,000 vessels we're interacting with every year. And they have a lot of operational questions, and these operational questions come to us. And then it's very difficult for a single individual to be able to grasp all of the different parts of the vessel and how it works. But we see that if we have, when we have, which we have, structured the data, applied correct search, semantic layers, etc., we see that about 70% of that is actually being now responded to by technology instead. We do have humans in the middle to validate, etc., because the domain knowledge is very critical. But this is actually real today.
Good, thank you. Dimitris, structural changes in 4 to 5 years.
Well, I'll qualify that, and I'll say that there's going to be 4 or 5 billion people using neuro AI in the next few years. I can't predict what they're going to be doing or what each one of them is going to specialize very carefully is going to produce. I'm a believer in common sense, which may sound a bit retro, but I don't think this is not new. I don't think that bringing all the information in the world to answer questions from the internet information and later on more focused information, bringing it to a person is not a new thing. People had advisors 1,000 years ago, and they would bring that information to them. So this is not a new paradigm. It's a new technology. It's not done the same way as it was done before, but it's not new. You will get more information about the world than you ever were before, and it's starting now. And where that takes you, and which use cases it changes, and what lives it changes, and so on, is not that hard to imagine. But to know exactly what's going to be the next big thing, or what's the killer app, and so on, I have no idea. I believe that that the language skills of neuro AI can be implemented now, and the language skills means you don't have a user interface anymore. A user interface has never been a happy situation in software, because it depends on how somebody interprets the information and how somebody designed it for the interpretation and so on. And it's an endless pain. This can be avoided. I'm not saying all user interfaces can be avoided, because you go to a restaurant, sometimes there's a picture of the food that's very good, and it's a user interface that's better than explaining and having the waiter explain what's in the food, which is often enough not clear to them or you. So user interfaces will change, and they will change like drastically, dramatically in the next few months and years. From then on,
that is a good segue into my direct question to you after your presentation, because what I took home was basically, as you just said, the interface is gone. Okay, so what we're left with, as I understand you, is either to talk with the AI or to prompt with it. What is the consequence and the impact of the user face going away at the vessel bridge and in the office for the fleet manager?
Well, vessel's bridge is more about information that's provided by the instruments at that point. So, I haven't given a lot of thought how you talk to the radar and how the radar talks back, but it's not rocket science. I mean, you do want to know where the other ship is if it's close, if it's on collision course. So presumably you can talk to it and it can answer back. The fleet manager I've had more thought about. And the fleet manager and all the people working for the fleet manager just won't have to go and figure out how somebody designed an application so they can get information out. Just like you won't have to go to a site where you're doing your tax returns and have to work out how somebody designed that site so you can do your tax return. Or when you're booking a ticket, trying to figure out how the ticketing system works so that you can get the ticket that you want, instead of wondering whether you're going to close the session suddenly and have to put all your information in again. So all of these things will change, because you can ask a direct question. The system has the answer. What it doesn't have, and that's why I think all of software will become domain specific, is it doesn't have the description of your business. It doesn't have a description of your business. Your software was built to give you the answer if you could go and find where to look. It wasn't designed to synthesize those things and give you answers. That's the part you have to build, and you can all build it yourselves. You don't buy it from anybody.
Good, thank you. Christian, Christopher, anything to add to that conversation?
I agree to the first part that was mentioned. I also agree to some extent that yes, you can build it as a shipping company. What needs to cater for your industry, whether you're doing liner business or whether you're doing spot trading or whatever you're doing. At the same time, I'm a strong believer in the fact that when we sit in our silos, we do not necessarily always know or get the great idea when we're sitting just in that silo. So what we've done in the past might not work tomorrow, and that's where I think getting input from the outside, from other industries, and applying that as test cases, I think that's what is important. And I very much believe in fostering an innovative mindset in companies, and I do see a lot of shipping companies that are putting KPIs on all their departments in terms of using collaboration tools, using AI in their daily work, and use that across, which I very much think is the right approach around that. Yes, you should build something that works for your business, no questions asked. At the same time, perhaps there's something out there that caters for perhaps 90% of what you need. So why are you spending time on that when you should instead spend time on fixing the next vessel or finding the next cargo, etc.?
Interesting challenge. Just imagine what we see internally at our place. We have one of the sort of strategic objectives of my department is to enable the builders. And with that means any builder in the company is a software developer, an analyst, or someone who builds something on top of what's the current technology stack. And democratization of production low code is obviously the trend, right? So what I'm seeing at my end is I will probably have problems avoiding overlapping homemade solutions across the company. And what you're pointing to is that as an industry, that's even a much larger problem.
Yeah, you could say that. And I do think it's especially in the era we are in right now, where so much is happening, and I agree with what Dimitri said. It's not a new paradigm, but the pace of it is happening fast, and I don't know what we can relate to World Wide Web when it was invented, etc. But things are happening quite fast in this one, so we need to be innovative around that and do a little bit of trial and error around that, but at the same time have a clear eye on the sort of the outcome, the business outcome, and what is already in there.
Good, thank you. Christopher, what I took home from your presentation was basically we have the data, AI is capable, now it's only up to us to learn how to use it. That brings us into the sort of topic of AI literacy, which I think is probably something everyone in this room is working on right now within their own companies. So you said that you had 100 good ideas, and then it turned out that 2 or 3 of them were really good ones. Could you tell us a little bit about that process of getting to 2 and 3 and describe those 2 and 3 and which problems they solve?
Yes, so I mentioned one of them earlier, which we are, of course, rolling out now as a kind of industrialized solution. The process was more or less bottom-up. Everyone is free to come with their ideas. And then that's typically anecdotal evidence, like I have this huge problem and everyone has believes that their problem is the biggest problem in the world, and when you look into it, it's not a big problem at all. It may be a big problem for you, but not for us. And that may seem a completely valid point that is a problem, but maybe not for us to solve as a company. So what we did was take all of these suggestions and we read through them and saw whether there were anything in them, and then we engaged some analysts to actually vet some of the ideas, and then we had some people who knows more about kind of the technology side, and then they evaluated together with the person who represented the problem what is the scope and is it possible. So it kind of, is it feasible, valuable to do? And then ended up basically seeing that we have a lot of questions that is very difficult to answer. We also have another topic, which I think we can be open about as well, is that when people interact with us, they send us emails all the time. We don't know on a company level what these emails contain. So we don't know what our customers are asking us about, or our internal people are wondering about. So we took everything and analyzed it, and then figured out what the biggest problems that people were actually having, based on just what they were asking about, not what they said they had a big problem with. And then we found about 10 kind of core topics, and then we automated one by one all of these. And one of the top ones is that we receive PDFs with RFQs and orders on 2,000 different formats. Even within the same company, you can send a different format. And then basically what happens is that when that is received, it gets automatically structured, which I think is a very strong part of what the AI does, and then gets put into our ERP system. So, slightly untrue, but almost automated from an email to our system without any standardization at all, which I think is quite cool.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. We keep saying that you got to get your data right for AI. Right? And I'm saying that internally in our own company all the time as well. But is that really a barrier against speedy innovation? Are we sort of keeping the bar too high on data quality? I'd like the whole panel to sort of share some reflections on that.
You want to go first?
I'm not the best person to have an opinion on this. I think the people that are gathering data from sensors need to do this. But all it is qualification. If you give it enough context, context is a big word these days. 30 years ago it wasn't. It's just as important. Context is the workings of the world around the data you're getting. So if you understand how the world works around the data you're getting, you'll anticipate what will be wrong with the data. So is AI solving that? Yes, I think it can give you a broader context of what can happen around the data you're receiving from a sensor. You can ask it, I'm getting this data, what do you think? But in the end of the day, in order to make use of the data, you have to take an instance of that data. And instance and propagation don't exist in neuro AI. There's no instance and there's no propagation. So you need to build that into your symbolic systems or agentic systems or whatever people want to call it these days. But it's just more programming. You take the program, with the programming, you get a bad input from a sensor. If you understand the circumstances, you'll make it into a good reading, or you will ignore it and take the next reading.
I think that data is king, and clean data and cleansed data is obviously much better than data that is not. If you train the data sets on poor data, then you can discuss how poor is the data. But and perhaps over time the models become better. If, coming back to what was said, the context is there, i.e. the variables are correct, i.e. we know exactly what we are putting into this. So my gut reaction, tells me yes, data, clean data, is still king, and is still the most important thing in this. But I also reckon that with new tools, it's perhaps easier to do the cleaning and cleansing of data. And going back 8-10 years, we were all talking about data governance, etc., and big data, etc., and we're just evolving into that, but the core fundamentals and the principles around building our models remain the same. And whether we go back and it's just physics models we look at, etc., then you still need a good data set.
I just want to add that just because something can do something doesn't mean it should. So I also agree that we can kind of gaffer tape over the problem with generative AI, but the problem is still there, that it's unreadable or unusable, that you can get cheat a little bit.
The good thing about AI these days is that it really sort of increases my interaction with the business units, because they want to talk with me about AI. They don't necessarily want to talk to me about all the business problems and opportunities, but if I invite them for an AI workshop, they show up. Really cool. And then we end up with lots of ideas, and they're expecting AI to solve all of them. But that's when I sort of turn it around and say, okay, now let's see at which technology is actually best at solving this. And what I find is that back when I worked in oil and gas for 5 years ago, we focused a lot on machine learning, and we experienced that when we started out, we thought, okay, this is a 12-month project. 48 months down the road, it turned out that now it's done. And we experienced that engaging with the business units, even on poor data, got them trapped into the process, basically. So we have improved the data along that process. So that's just one of my learnings from there. But are we focusing too much on generative AI these days on the cost of machine learning, for instance?
Do you want to start? I think this is your area.
I don't know. I simply don't know. I can tell some anecdotes. We have, what we're seeing is that we have worked with models for quite some time, refining that, called machine learning models, etc. What we're seeing is that when we do the assessment around our models, the questions we get back are much more educated, which also tells us that our customers are becoming better and more refined. So that lifts the whole conversation, which I think is a good thing. So I don't see it as either or. I see it more as I think a natural progression on if we look at what has happened around this. So I think it also makes sense. But I also hope at some point we'll find a plateau where we can agree on some core principles around what does good actually look like. Because right now it's all over the place, which is fine. And again, I love the innovation, I love new ideas, but it's also difficult to find a way forward if we don't know what that looks like.
Yeah. So I would, it depends on the company context, I think, but yes, it takes up a lot of bandwidth. And if we expect to solve problems that should have been solved in other ways, kind of back to the previous point as well, yes, then we are overdoing it. It's not, in my opinion, a silver bullet in every context. So if we stop doing, let's say a data platform is a good example. There are people questioning whether you should invest in a data platform now because it will get cheaper. And then I'm talking not the hardware collection part, but maybe more of the cloud software part, because it will get cheaper. I think it's expensive not to do it now as well. So I would say that you have to balance the exploration you're doing into the generative AI and the actual exploitation you can do in the other areas as well, where it's probably a shorter time to revenue or impact.
I just want to qualify the concept of big data. Big data is often most important in industries where they don't know the cause of things. If you buy soaps of different colors at any store, Walmart or wherever, the system has no clue why you bought the one color and not the other. It has to make a lot of correlations, and they're not going to be cause and effect. It's going to be correlations. Same in the oil and gas industry. A lot of the exploration, it's unknown what the structure of the geology is. So you have to suss out and perhaps reverse engineer it from the symptoms and the readings you're reading. That's not the case in our business. Cause and effect in our business, in most processes, is very clear. Anybody can tell you what the 2 or 3 causes could be to any problem. So the idea that you're going to go and collect data and fill large repositories of data for things that you know how they work is not as important as it is in other industries. I mean, in your industry, you're dealing with services, so it's much more complicated than dealing with the actual running of a ship. So I would say that you don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about how AI is going to help you with machine learning when the data you're collecting is a fraction of what everybody else is collecting in other industries and doesn't lead to any huge insights either.
Thank you. We're getting to the closing question here. So you're advising a shipping CIO and they want to move forward on AI. What 3 steps would you advise them to take?
of course, the business that you're in is the important thing. So it has to be something that serves a business purpose. Start there. Figure out what is it that is actually the most critical from a business point of view. Because often when we talk about this, we also, and we haven't talked about that today, it's around change management in getting people involved. The easiest way to do that is look for where the dollars are sort of situated in the company and say, okay, if we fix that, then part of the operations will follow. So make it easier for your commercial teams, make it easier for the operations team around that. That's where I would start. And then you can trigger your way into IT and finance and other operations. That would be my clear first slide recommendation.
So make your AI initiatives support your business objectives.
Yes.
For me, it's 3 points, I think. It's the domain part, don't underestimate it. It's the architecture part. Make it open, make it not close doors. Because what's happening now is that there's a huge opportunity space, and we don't know where it's going. So if you close doors now, you may find yourself stuck later. And the last part is people, because this, back to my presentation a little bit, this is not an IT initiative thing. This is for everyone to use, which I think is much nicer than a lot of the technologies that we've had previously. Back to your point about suddenly people are opening your door and wanting to talk to you, which is, I'm glad for you in that sense. And I think that is letting people play with it and helping them when they're getting stuck, I think is how to exploit the benefits of it.
Thank you. Dimitris?
I think that your challenge talking to the CIO is going to be appealing to something that triggers the right kind of thinking in their own minds. And the CIO has been around for several years in large companies, not so much in smaller companies. In other words, there's nobody people look to deal with information in companies with 10 ships. So the question that you have to ask anybody, perhaps this the owner in a smaller company and the CIO in a bigger company, is what problem can we solve now in the broadest possible way now that we have this great new technology? And it goes back to what's the biggest problem that they're dealing with. I mean, I got the other day I was talking to somebody from a LNG company, and he told me, I see a problem in the purchasing process, which I've been saying for 10 years and nobody does anything. And the other problem I see is that people are spending all day looking at non-conformances and trying to figure out what they're about and how they trend. So he went around the company and he got the information. He could now go to the CIO or the CEO and tell them I can solve these two problems. So it works back to what does this great technology do, and you have to think deeply to see what it can do. And you'll hit, but fortunately, everybody else will tell you. you can walk out in the street and find people telling you what it can do. So you'll get the information. CIO will get the information, and then the likes of me will say, well, why don't we solve this problem and that problem, which I've heard you say is a big problem.
Thank you. Thank you. That was my final question to the panel. So if you want to sort of see if we had a good thread throughout this morning. From my point of view, thank you to all the panelists for joining us.
Yeah, okay, so thank you for the panel. There are maybe we take 2 questions or so. Oh, we have 1 minute.
Hello panel, and thank you for a good talk. My name is Niels, I'm from DNV. I have one more question around this, because we talk a lot about, let's say, enabling the data for use in new services, new algorithms, new software, AI. How do we know the data is current, correct, green-lighted? And I think Andreas touched into it a little bit. You need to always know if your sensors are reporting correctly, you need to monitor that before you ask the AI a question. So what do you guys think about the accuracy, the ability of the data before people ask the question, and how do you enable the organizations to understand the importance of this and invest into that so they get the accurate data reported?
I think maybe we'll leave that to Christopher.
Yeah.
Or Dimitris wanted to answer that.
You go.
We missed the mic, so can't took the mic, so you got to
No,
speak up.
I can try to speak loud. My base assumption is that data is wrong most of the time. So if there is a conflict between anecdotal evidence and data, you need domain knowledge to know if you're wrong or not. And that's why I said don't discount that domain knowledge. Don't give it to someone who doesn't know anything about what's going on to make a decision on it. Because for the most part, you know that at some point it's going to be wrong. That's the only certainty you have. So just build that into how you use it as well.
Yes, I think there's there's a misconception here that we might bring to the surface. The idea of data. Data has never been a word used widely. If I go to my hometown and talk to the other mariners about data, what's data? If I talk to my mother about data, she's 97, what's data? If I talk to my uncle who was a very good businessman, what's data? They understand information, they don't understand data. And what's happened here is that we've taken and filled sort of terabytes of data into systems without the story that got the data in there. So if you're looking at the data without the story of how it got in there, it's going to have problems. And why did this happen? Because Silicon Valley had 1,000 companies or 10,000 companies that had the data that they collected. The data doesn't tell you the story. I go to the ATM and I take money out. It doesn't know why I take the money out or if it doesn't give me my money, what problem am I going to have? It doesn't know anything about that. It's just because it's a restricted software. And the fact that the software was restricted from 40 years ago by collecting data about whatever we buy or whatever transactions are commonly found in huge databases, it didn't have the story. Of course there's going to be problems with the data. But why are we talking about data? Because somebody built a system to solve the data problem, store it, make it sure you don't lose it and all those things. But didn't get involved in what the story was, didn't have access to the story.
I think we're talking about data because DNV wants to make sure that we make it easy for them to do their job, which is understandable. We can appreciate we're in the same boat around that. I do think that if we look at the industry, then around 70% of all vessels are all relying on Noon reports. And given that the average age of the fleet is around 22 years old, it might not be... there might be vessels where you don't want to invest in that infrastructure on board. So the question is, what do we do and how do we do it? I think the basic thing is that if we take the Noon reports, for instance, make sure you have some thresholds. Make sure that you discard the biggest outliers in the data around that. I think that's the starting point. And coming back to when I say that's on all vendors, and it's eventually also on the shipping companies, and it's on DNV to help in that process. So don't just sit down there, be up here, be together with us in the boat, help us out, show us the way. So I think that's on all of us.
And I think lunch was served 3 minutes ago, so let's wrap this up.